Well, Steve, thank you for being here with us today. It's a pleasure. This is kind of a reunion of sorts with Steve. Steve actually hired me at Cisco in 2000, and I worked for Steve for about 10 years. I see many former Cisco employees. I see at least maybe half a dozen or more of our former team here at Cisco. So, Steve, it's a great pleasure to have you here.
Well, thanks, Greg.
Yeah, Steve, tell us just a brief introduction about yourself.
Yeah, so I've been in the ecosystem role, and I've started from startups to companies like Cisco and now to a company like Equinix, and I've been fortunate enough to work in business development or ecosystems and strategic alliances for the last 15 to 20 years, and it's been a great experience. It's really a challenging job. I came from 2 startups in the Valley. Cisco hired me in to initially start their service provider ecosystem. At the time, Cisco was not a service provider business. Became a $12 billion business, and then run all of the strategic alliances, which became a $4 billion, $500 million business for Cisco in the alliances organization. And then I wanted to go do another startup within Cisco, so I went to the IoT organization, and we were trying to build out vertical models around IoT platform businesses, and Cisco was not that successful in the development of a cloud-based model, and then Equinix came after me and said, we're in the middle of a transition, and we'll talk more about that, I'm sure.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So, Steve, you're at Equinix now.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about Equinix, kind of what your scope and role is,
Sure.
and why is Equinix relevant or important in the cloud world today?
Yeah, sure. First of all, for those of you looking for free gym memberships, I'm not the guy. Okay. When I was at Cisco back in the 2000 timeframe, people thought I was a food services guy, and the guy in the truck. Yes. Yeah, it still does. And so for those of you wanting to work out later, I'm sure you can, but not at our facility. So, in fact, you go into our facility, you get frisked. I mean, it's highly secure.
High security.
Yeah, it's cool, yeah. And so my role is about developing ecosystems in what we call our producer or the technology industry providers ecosystem section of our business, as well as what we call commerce ecosystems, which are the digital industries that are transforming and how they can change themselves at Equinix. So for those of you who don't know Equinix, we're about a $5.5 billion company. We are a data center company. We have 206 now after just acquiring the movement into Mexico. 206 data centers around the world, all connected via fabric, and probably 53 different metros and in 25 different countries. And so all these centers are big hubs of customers, right? And so many of them we'll talk about are cloud customers. So 1,700 networks, 1,200 cloud and IT providers in our centers. You've got the content delivery network companies in our centers. And also the financial services sector, probably 250 market-making platforms. So many of the trades that you execute in as you monetize the value of the recent stock market are in our centers in dense ecosystems. And we have 350,000 connections, physical and logical, of companies talking to each other or to clouds in our centers. And so the reason we're relevant in the cloud business is some of our biggest customers and partners are Amazon, Google, Microsoft, IBM, Oracle, et cetera. They are all, and we're anywhere between 35 to 60% of their edges, right, are in our centers. So you have big data centers that have the big Google, Iowa server farms. We're not that type of company. Yeah. You walk into our centers, we're like Grand Central Station. It's people getting on and off trains, moving back and forth, exchanging information, and the density of the ecosystems are extremely valuable, right, in our business model. And so that's what's continued to, but we're on a recurring based model. So 94% of our business reoccurs in a monthly recurring model, and we generally monetize through power, space, and interconnection services that we provide to our clients around the world.
Yep.
So clouds are big and continue to be one of our fastest growing ecosystems. I'd say the enterprise, the network service providers are about $1 billion. The clouds are $1 billion. The financial services industry is $500 million. We've got the content delivery networks, which is a couple $100 million, and then we have a series of 9 different ecosystems, from connected automobile industry and digital transformation on the auto side, the changing of the payments industry, all the way into, of course, what I call the transformation of the IT industry. And so we're not only a place for the Googles and the Microsoft Edges of the world, but we are also at a place now where the legacy IT companies who have been on-prem, whether it be servers or networking or whatever, are looking to move to as-a-service models. And with $25 billion invested in 203 centers, we enable them to move into these as-a-service models without having to build the capital that a Google or a Microsoft or an Amazon have already put into the ground, effectively. So we're a neutral Switzerland for these companies to be able to exchange.
Yep. And Steve, we talked a little bit about some of the trends that we see in the industry.
Right.
What are some of the key disruptions or trends that you are monitoring that are kind of top of mind from an Equinix perspective?
Yeah, I think, well, first of all, we're continuing to see, but there's been a change. And I think, it was a very good discussion just held with the Google team. Number one is the public cloud continues to grow. And born in the cloud companies are continuing to come either through on Amazon or Google platforms or otherwise. But that business will be $277 billion this year. It'll grow $50 billion between a combination of SaaS and the IaaS market. And the IaaS market is growing at 20-25% a year, adding it's probably in the neighborhood of 10 to 15 billion a year.
Yes.
But what's changed in the last 2 or 3 years ago, it was pretty much Amazon, a little bit of Google and Microsoft. And what's happened is we've seen, number one, the emergence of competition. So I think that's good for everybody. And as we saw earlier, it's very good for us because we are in a place that enables you to get on, click point, one exchange, one API, and you're on any cloud you want and on the on-ramp. And you can point, click, and configure capacity to any of the clouds. And it's very, very, very quick. And so from that aspect, we're seeing continued growth of the public cloud. The big change that's happened in the last, and everybody 3 years ago was public cloud will dominate everything, right? That's changed. And I think David hit the nail on the head. What we're seeing is that the hybrid cloud market today, which is in the $20 billion range, will grow to probably over $100 billion. And what I mean by that is customers have figured out in the last 3 years, based on cost, based on application mix, how to begin to plan their workloads. What stays on-prem in their private data centers? What goes to a public cloud? What has to exist in a world of a hybrid environment? So customers, on average, in the market studies we've done, are looking to run between 2 to 4 IaaS players and another 10 to 20 SaaS players, and they want choice. As we said earlier, people want choice. So we're seeing this growth of the hybrid cloud take off, and we call it the multi-hybrid model, on-prem, colo, and public. And choice, people accurately was described, don't want to change their locked-in on-prem strategy for a locked-in crowd strategy. So they want choice. And so if they say, hey, Google's great with TensorFlow and analytics, I want to leverage Google for these applications. Amazon does a great job on storage and S3 at price points. They charge you for taking things out. I want to use Amazon for this, and Microsoft Office 365. So we're seeing the proliferation of customers wanting choice, and they want it to be able to be consumed in the way they want to use it, not necessarily locked into one particular company. So that's probably the second thing is the evolution of this hybrid multi-cloud world will continue to provide opportunities for many companies, I think, in this space, not just the big four.
Yeah, I want to drill down a little bit in the hybrid cloud ecosystem effort that you're doing. But in addition to the industry trends that you talked about, what are some of the trends that you see in alliances, channels, and ecosystems? Mayank talked a little bit about those and some predictions. I'm not asking you to make any predictions, but what are some of the trends that you're seeing that are relevant to you?
Well, I think there's certainly the importance of, first of all, aligning your ecosystem strategy to the strategy of the company.
Yes.
So we have to decide as a company where our core technology and our platform services competencies are and where we're not competent, right? And we're certainly we're a 2% R&D player, right? So that means that we don't have a massive amount of technology spending going on in our company. Therefore, bringing in companies who have technology, leveraging our platform around the world is a critical part of our strategy. And so we have to be clear with these companies, this is what we're going to do, right? And this is where we're going to allow you to leverage your technology at our center. So the first thing any company has to do is sit down and look at where its platform or product control points are, where you want to go, and then how do you want to then build your ecosystem model around that to amplify that, but also keep the ecosystem profitable, and they can trust you in the space that they're operating in. It's not something you're going to jump into. And I would just say, as earlier stated, some companies historically in the on-prem have been a little bit more cannibalistic. Other ones are a little more collaborative and open. I would say Microsoft many years ago was very cannibalistic. And so I think that stays as an important thing, be able to understand where your core competencies are, how you want to hold value and add value, and then build in the framework around that. So I think that stayed the same. The second thing is there are going to be strategic relationships that are very important. We call them magnets, right? Because as a platform company in business, these are the companies that we want to bring into our platform centers because they pull tremendous, magnets. And so those are worth a lot to us, right? And so, and certainly the cloud companies are one example. And so you have to prioritize and identify and then align resources around those companies that are truly going to create magnetic effects. And so whether it's in a commerce ecosystem or a technology ecosystem, we have magnets that we went after early in the exchange trading world. They pulled in the rest of the market-making systems. We have magnets we're going after in the payments industry. They're going to pull in a tremendous number of things. We have magnets going on in the auto and OEM business, et cetera. So I still think you need the competencies of a strategic relationship structure in place to do that. Probably the big thing that's changed as you move from a product business to a platform business is the number of companies that you have to work with and the speed at which they can come on and off the platform and consume. That's a big change, right? So you have to have the open API structures. You've got to have a technology developer system program, and we're a small player in that compared to a Google or a Microsoft. And you have to have easy ways for them to get in and out of your platform and consume the services in a much more rapid monetizable fashion. And where in the old days, you can kind of look at the players, understand who the big ones are, and then build complex relationships. We don't have the time to do that anymore. So those are some of the changes I think that have gone on.
Adds a lot of complexity to the to these bringing these magnets in. So thinking about those trends that you see in the industry, plus the kind of ecosystem trends that you're seeing, what are the implications that you see on the Equinix ecosystem and what you're doing today?
Well, I think number one is we have to maintain our neutrality because that is how the company's core reason for existing started, right? So we were the place where the networks could interconnect themselves much more cost effectively and efficiently, and that created a lot of value. And so it doesn't mean we won't have preference, but at the end of the day, companies have to come to us and feel that they're going to be treated fairly, consistently, whether they be a channel partner for us, just an ecosystem supplier on our platform, or a consumer of the services and interconnecting with other companies in our data centers. So I think that continues to be a core principle of Equinix is neutrality. That's part of our name, effectively. The second thing is that we don't have the tools and systems, so we have to also understand what our core capabilities are and how we can stick true to that, right? Doesn't mean we can't take chances and grow, but sometimes you can get a big ego and you can move into spaces that we don't have the core, the value chain models to be able to exist in. We have to define what we're not going to do as well as what we're going to do. And then finally, we're going through a big change in the company. We're moving from a company that's been a power space and interconnection company into more of a platform power space. And that's a big cultural change. And Raj is in the room here. That's a journey. It's like going from an on-prem computer company to a as-a-service company. We're selling as an IT service, as a service models. We have a cultural change where we have to be real about how fast we can evolve and stay true to the things that we do well over time.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
You know, one thing about Steve, which is fascinating, he's an author. And he authored a book called Strategic Alliances, 3 Ways to Make Them Work. This was from Harvard Business School Press. And it's a fascinating book, really quick read, really has some great nuggets, et cetera. And I was going to ask another question, then I'm going to open it up for questions. And we're going to give a book away to a couple of good questions that we get from the audience that Steve will provide. So think about your best question for Steve.
It's better than melatonin on the plane. Put you right to sleep, no guarantee.
Steve always said, this is the best, fastest way to sleep is to read his book on a plane. But that's not true, because I've read it on a plane and I was wide awake.
And you snored the entire time.
Yeah. So Steve, if you think about this book, you talk about alliances, 3 ways to make them work. Is there a key nugget there that people could relate to that they could apply within their own kind of ecosystem effort that comes from the book that would be applicable?
No, I think I used, number 1 was about, aligning your partnership, your ecosystem, and your alliance strategy with the strategy of the business. And, you heard a couple of examples of companies getting together because somebody wanted to do a partnership because, we had some, I remember when John used to come in Chambers and, we have to do a partnership with this company. We went down through our checklist and said, we don't have a good value prop. We don't understand the market. We don't, the combined value chain has massive holes in it. We don't know how to sell to this group. Other than that, the CEOs want to get together and have a drink and go have a partnership and announce something, right? Other than that, we're in great shape, right? And of course, when you put metrics in about scalable business creation, you're very accountable for that. And so it is important, number 1, to understand where you need to partner, because it's a pain in the ass, right?
Yes.
It's hard.
It's hard.
It's hard stuff,
Absolutely.
right? Because you're taking 2 value chains of 2 companies, trying to link them together and somehow create value and move at the speed of light these days, which is extremely difficult.
Yes.
The second thing is you've got to have a framework, right? And you have to be able to build and train people in the skills that can repeat that framework. And as you start, whether it's in one location or you roll it out across the globe, you have to build competencies. And so, some of the early work we did with ASAP and the skills development, the profiles of the teams, the career development, best practices, programs, things like that, we trained our teams in how that they could repeat, because that's a very important skill. And, it's not, as you said earlier, was a credit card, a lunch, and, a good old boys club back in the days, right? Which was, very gender, but, you have to be able to move quickly with competency of any people anywhere, and you have to train these people. And the third thing is you have to create a culture, right? I think for taking risk and chances, and you have to be able to allow people to fail, right? And that's a hard thing sometimes to do.
Absolutely. Great advice.
Questions?
It's interesting. Let me make one more point. Steve, if you look at the best practices and the kind of the culture that he created at Cisco when we were there, many of the alliance leaders now that I see in the industry really were incubated as part of Steve's organization. Really, really fascinating that those best practices and these leaders were really got their start in leadership roles in other major companies from Steve's tutelage and leadership. So let me open it up to the audience. Norma, you have the first question.
I've read your book. It did reflect what I think was the best thinking and world-class framework and competencies of the time it was written.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think has changed since that time?
Oh, I think a lot has changed. Yeah, I think the techniques of complex major relationship management are still a principle there. I think how you form partnerships strategically are still there. But my goodness, the world has moved so much quicker. We could take a year or 2 to get something up and running, and we used to do it pretty quickly. Because we had teams and groups around the world. We know how to organize. That's like old school, right? In terms of time, we don't have that time anymore. Yeah. You've got to move quicker. You've got to be able to move more effectively, and you have to be able to, I think, create different ways to monetize, the value of the relationships. And so we heard from earlier from the NetApp leader, we're playing with different models and revenue share, different models. You've got to create whole different ways to monetize the value. The speed of what's happening is number one. It's different. The second, I think you need to bring in people that are culturally aligned to that rate of speed and are comfortable with that, because that's hard. It's hard because I think that's a very difficult thing. So I would say the speed at which things are happening, the complexity of the technology, because we've all seen in the Valley, 20 years of changes in technology, but we're never seeing the speed of technology change plus the business model change simultaneously at this speed. And so it's a very complicated world. And so I think you have to have people that are comfortable with ambiguity in that world and can figure out things and move quickly to figure out how to solve those types of problems. Because the book's getting rewritten many times by much more competent people than I am today. Yeah.
Thank you, Norma. Great question. We won't give you a book because you already have one. So, yes, questions here.
I've been reading this IDC report recently about the repatriation of workloads from the public cloud to the
Yeah.
on-prem. So, what keeps your business sticky, saying that these companies are still? What kind of workloads are still companies running in that public cloud?
Well, I think you're continuing to see a lot of workloads go to public cloud, right? That don't have issues on data confidentiality, don't have issues of location of the data, that are more like simplistic workloads and things like that, and those are very cooling. But we are seeing, people are now realizing the cost of getting data out of clouds. Now, eventually, I think you'll see pricing structures change. Not clear to me that people will be able to charge the amount of money, and some of the players are, for repatriation of data that are being charged today. I think that change will happen in the next year or two. But we're seeing also people realizing that these workloads don't belong in the public cloud. Now, they do belong in a location where I can control the access to the data, the physical, the logical, the other. And I want to get to the public cloud to do certain things with the information, but I don't want that data sitting in a public cloud. The other thing is people are beginning to realize the economics of what makes sense in a public cloud, what doesn't make sense from the economic point of view, not just the data side. So what we've seen, we do workload planning, and we've seen probably what we think are several different workloads that are going to form the foundation of these hybrid multi-cloud worlds that will stick in I would say a different model per se over the next several years. And that's why you're going to see this multiple growth.
To follow up to that, I think, do you see more enterprise application workloads or do you see cloud native type of apps being deployed in public cloud? Enterprise apps like SAP.
Yeah, well, I think everyone is still looking at that as one channel by which they'll deploy their technology. It will be the public cloud and will continue to grow very quickly. I think other players will say that we've seen, without naming companies, coming back and saying, my God, I just got the bill for running in that environment. So spinning it up, getting it going makes a lot of sense. Speed, time, whatever. But I just got the check. Now my company's growing quite well and quite profitable, and I'm scaling. And all of a sudden, the cost in one particular company, they were paying $70 million, right? And they could then implement their own model in our data centers across the world for, I would say, significantly less than that cost, right? Recognizing there's still a lot of advantages for the public cloud.
Yep.
Yeah. So we're seeing knowledge. The enterprises are learning. Right, they're beginning to segment their workloads and apps and saying, public cloud, hybrid multi-cloud, private data center, here's how I'll begin to do workload. And we're seeing the SIs also build significant practices, whether it be an Accenture or Deloitte, and workload planning and what makes sense in that environment.
Yes, two questions, but only one book.
Yeah.
Okay. One final question, yes. Yeah.
So as your business model says changing and it makes sense to do business
Yeah.
you're in, how is that then disruptive? You've got more partners, you've got more hands in the pot. How are you managing through, one, transitioning your revenue business model and also dealing with all else?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I don't know if we know the answer to that yet, to be honest with you. What we are seeing is that the level of services we provide are what I call enabling services, right, to these players. And so we make it easy for them to locate their technology or their enterprise networks or things in our centers, and then connect them transparently and point click and all over the world, so that we give them those types of things. So what we are seeing is that the multi-partner model, right? So we recently won a major retailer with, I will just say with a company called, with WWT, Cisco, and Microsoft, right? The Azure working together in an Equinix model, because what they wanted was a hybrid solution to their, I'll just say, their particular problem. And so we are seeing the importance of, and this is where your systems and tools, the importance of collaboration and coordination around those more complicated selling motions. And money is moving around, but companies that realize that's how the customers want to consume in the future, there will be profit enough in there. They just aren't going to be necessarily the same way that they used to sell in the past.
Thank you. That's the end of the question and answers. Let me just thank you, Steve, for taking the time today. Thank you.
Steve, thank you. So who's getting the books?
Thanks.
Steve, thank you for that. That was fantastic. Just really great insights into the speed of change, how things are changing these days. We're actually going to, let's grab those guys.